Tivari's ability to connect with Nepalese people on the ground and in government is essential to the team's mission. Earlier in the day, he chatted in Nepali with Tulasi Prasad Sitaula, the Secretary of Physical Infrastructure and Transport. Now, as he tracks the damage into the rubble-filled yards of damaged homes, Tivari asks residents for details on what happened during the quake.
We've got to have somebody who has connections there. We're lost without that,
Kiefer says.
Thank goodness for Binod.
Being able to hit the ground running is key, because the scientists are working in a shrinking time window. After the humanitarian rescue operation, but before the geophysical evidence they need to find is erased by the monsoon rains that sweep through the region during the summer. Nepalese people are known for being quick hikers, and Tivari has the rest trailing him.
In my heart, I'm still Nepali,
he calls over his shoulder. Tivari and the team, which is supported by the U.S. National Science Foundation, are examining every bit of infrastructure they come across: bridges, roads, houses, and hydropower projects. But they're also looking at how different types of soil reacted, in part to identify slopes in this mountainous country that have a high risk of landslide. Finding those structural weaknesses in the terrain now will allow them to better predict which slopes are most likely to give way when the monsoon comes, and make sure that residents are out of harm's way. Soil also plays a role in whether a building survives an earthquake. Its composition, the grain size, how densely packed it is, and how much water it's holding. Later in the day, in an area called Gangabu, Tivari climbs under a metal gate to examine a 3-story brick and concrete school that has sunk. Its side sheared off so that a classroom gapes open next to the basketball hoop. The principal's son joins Tivari and his team as they stand next to a mural depicting Charles Darwin, Marie Curie, and Galileo. He explains that school officials had built the structure to withstand an 8.0 quake.
But they didn't check the soil profile,
Tivari says, shaking his head.
If you don't check the soil, how do you build a foundation?
Tivari and his team were driving on the Aranico Highway when the magnitude 7.3 aftershock hit the region May 12th. The ground lurched, and their car swayed as if rocked by high waves. It was like
some big elephant coming to your car and shaking the car,
Tivari says. The members of the team were headed east to Charikot, in the district of Dolaka, one of the hardest-hit areas. But they quickly made a U-turn to Kathmandu to find out how this major quake affected roads already cracked by the original temblor. Driving back, they soon saw signs of this 1-2 punch. Buildings that had been standing when the team drove past to leave the capital were reduced to rubble. Once they were done examining the wreckage in Kathmandu, which was not as extensive as it could have been, they headed back toward the epicenter of the aftershock. It was a frightening drive. The highway cuts through mountainous terrain, and debris loosened by the shaking could have come down on them.
Buildings you can see, but landslides, you have no idea where they're coming from,
Tivari says.
Big boulders, big rocks.
But there was no question of turning back, because the aftershock presented an important scientific opportunity. They'd be able to see the damage just hours after a major earthquake hit.
We were scared, but we kept on going,
Tiveri says. The damage was extensive near the epicenter. Homes made with mud mortar and reinforced masonry had fallen apart. Several buildings had pancaked.
They don't have money to buy cement, but the clay is available everywhere. Mud is available everywhere. Water is available, and the stones are available,
he says of the residents.
They grab stone from the mountain with the help of their friends and neighbors, and then they get mud and water, and they help each other out to build the house.
Before returning to California, Tiveri spends the last few days of his trip giving talks to geotechnical and civil engineering groups based in Nepal. It's not how he planned to spend his time, but the country's building codes will need to be rebuilt as well, because the current standards don't take the nature of the ground beneath them into account.
In the U.S., we do an investigation and then we design. Here, the investigation is very poor because people do not know how to do it,
Tiveri says. In some ways, Tiveri says, he's surprised by the limits of the damage. In many places, the soil seemed to damp the waves of shaking from the earthquake, though the team is still studying the soil to find out how this happens.